Welcome everyone to our first Zoom forum event. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a special guest this evening, Michael Pack, who's the producer of the new Clarence Thomas documentary. We're going to be showing a clip of that, so we're all very excited here. Just want to turn it over to Mike Ginsberg to give a couple remarks about SUV GOP in the forum. Okay, Mike?
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you all so much for joining us and for, using the new technology that we pioneered tonight to be a part of this meeting. We really do appreciate it, and we appreciate everybody's interest in what should be a very exciting topic and a very interesting topic, and a topical one too, given everything in the news regarding the Democratic nominees. So we look forward to the discussion tonight. Just a brief sort of mention about SUV and what we've been up to. Obviously, things have been a little thrown off because of the pandemic, but that hasn't really stopped us. This year, we have focused on a few different things. Number one, we've continued to do our newsletter. If you aren't getting it, by the way, if you're on the chat tonight and you're not getting our SUV GOP newsletter, you can email us, SUVGOP, or SUVGOP@gmail.com. We'll be sure to get you all the information. We'll get you on our email list. Certainly would love to have you on there. Another thing we focused on very heavily this year is the local races. Many of you probably know Sang Yi is a candidate, a good friend of SUV GOP, and a candidate in the city of Fairfax election. Would love to see him get reelected. So we've been working that front. We've also done some, as you know, we've been doing podcasts. We did our first Zoom podcast with Pete Snyder, who you probably know started the Virginia 30-Day Fund to get assistance funds to small businesses who are suffering from the pandemic and to help them stay afloat during these challenging times. He was really gracious to join us, and we've posted that on our website and on our Facebook page. So we're trying to stay active in that front as well. For the course of the year, we've got a lot of things, hopefully we'll be able to get back out onto the trail, but we plan more Zoom conferences, we plan more podcasts, etc. If you haven't had a chance, feel free to read the reports. You can download the reports we issued over the last 2 years. You can see a little bit of what's going on. A couple other things that we've done. The Northern Virginia Republican Business Forum is a project of the SUV GOP. Ron Wright and Sherilyn LeBon, who introduced us, got this going tonight. They are the co-chairs of the business forum, and they are the sponsor of this evening's event. They've had some wonderful events over the course of this year. We had James Golden, who many of you probably know better as Bo Snerdley, on the Rush Limbaugh program. He came to speak. We've had several other, really great speakers. We did a happy hour with Congressman Denver Riggleman before the pandemic hit. So we've been very active, and we hope to continue to do that. And we're staying in touch with the congressional offices and the political campaigns to make sure that we are able to provide all this kind of interesting commentary. So if you want to learn more about SUV, learn more about NVRBF, visit our website, suvgop.com or nvrbf.com, and you can find out everything you need to know. So we're really excited about this event. We're really excited about this year. We think we've got a great chance both locally and nationally, and we're also looking forward to 2021. It's not too late or not too early to start thinking about that. So we are, and we're starting to lay some groundwork for that as well. So with that, thank you again, everybody, for joining, and I'll turn it back to Sherilyn.
Thanks, Mike, for that lovely overview. Now I'd like to introduce Michael Pack, who is president of Manifold Productions, an independent film and television production company that he founded in 1977. Pack has written, directed, and produced numerous award-winning, nationally broadcast documentaries, as well as corporate and educational films. His most recent projects include Rickover, The Birth of Nuclear Power, narrated by Joan Allen, Rediscovering Alexander Hamilton, hosted by Richard Brookhiser, God in the Inner City, narrated by Felicia Rashad, and Rediscovering George Washington, hosted by Richard Brookhiser. All of them have been broadcast on PBS. Let's all welcome Michael Pack.
Well, thank you, Sherilyn. Well, my latest film is called Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in His Own Words, and it's a 2-hour film about the life of Clarence Thomas. It'll be broadcast on PBS next Monday, a week from today, at 9 p.m., although sometimes you should double check your local listings, but I'm pretty sure WETA in Virginia has it at that time. We've been working on this film for 3 years, and it began when I heard through mutual friends that Justice Thomas was getting discouraged by having his enemies tell a story and people who didn't agree with him, and he was unhappy about the half-truths and untruths circulating about him. I didn't know that much about him, but after meeting with him and reading his memoir, I realized he had a great story to tell and that he was a great storyteller. Contra to his image, he is in fact a very warm, friendly person and has a great voice and is a great storyteller. So the premise of the film is to let him talk directly to camera and tell his life story from the beginning up to today in his own words. And we were privileged that the only interviews in the film are Justice Thomas and his wife, Ginny. And we are lucky that they granted us 30 hours of interview time over 6 months, an unprecedented degree of access from any Supreme Court justice ever, especially from one who is reluctant to speak to the media. So he really trusted us to tell his story, and we did our best, and I hope you like it. I think we're going to run the first 10 or 12 minutes of the film, so you'll see the beginning of that story. So maybe after the clip, I should talk a little about where the story went from there before we take questions.
James, are we keeping the glasses on or off? Does it matter?
The only issue is that because they're bifocals, there's a line going through his eye.
Do you need them on, Justice Thomas?
No, I wear them. That's my normal. I normally have glasses on.
Yes, not on the cover of your book.
Well, except for the cover of my book, I normally.
Justice Thomas, how did you decide you wanted to become a lawyer?
You look around society and you see it's laws. Laws affect everybody. If you're poor and you look at people like my grandfather, I think of when he came home one day and he was very upset and he was taking a drink. He never took a drink in the middle of the day. Well, what had happened was he was driving the oil truck. Police officer stops him for having too many clothes on. And that's ridiculous. He has no way of challenging that. So the law, he ran into the law, and he always was afraid of that. You couldn't walk across certain parks. You couldn't go to certain schools. People's property being taken. People taking advantage of them because they could say the law did this or did that. So I decided I was going to go to law school.
Judge Thomas, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please be seated.
Let me look a little bit from your life and history. You are somewhat of an enigma. You have gone through many changes in your life, which brings us to the question of what is the real Clarence Thomas like?
The person you see is Clarence Thomas. I don't know that I would call myself an enigma. I'm just simply different from what people painted me to be. My earliest memories are those of Pinpoint, Georgia, a life far removed in space and time from this room, this day, and this moment. I am descended from the West African slaves who lived on the Barrier Islands and in the low country of Georgia, South Carolina, and coastal northern Florida. In Georgia, my people were called Geechees. In South Carolina, Gullahs. It was just a distinctive culture. It was West African. It had a mixture of English and other words with kind of a diction that was somewhat difficult to understand.
Oh, the Buford boat done come. Gonna put 'em in the pot by sham. Gotta eat 'em up, gonna swallow 'em down. Gotta eat all of 'em by 'em.
My husband's childhood was so unlike mine. I know when I first went down to Pinpoint and I said, Clarence, I can't understand a word that they just said because they talk in a dialect, so I just try to listen and smile.
I was born at home right on Shipyard Creek in 1948. My mother always said I was too stubborn to cry. And I guess that was sort of an indication of the kind of person I would be. I'm a middle child. My mother had all of us, we think, before she was 20. And then she and my father separated when I was a toddler. So I would have no early memories of him. I have memories of other family members, but he wasn't there. He wasn't among the family members. Many of the men raked oysters during the winter and caught crabs and fish in the spring and summer. Their boats, which were called bateaux, could be heard far away in the marshes. They would slowly emerge from the labyrinths of surrounding creeks and pull up to the dock, where the day's haul was unloaded. The women picked crab. People like my mother and my relatives did that at the crab factory. And they also shucked oysters, all of which is hard work. Well, when they were gone, we were on our own. We were off on our adventures. We would catch minnows in the creek. We'd walk along the water's edge, throwing oyster shells. Most people didn't have store-bought toys, so you had lots of old tires that had gone bad. If you go back to the movie, To Kill a Mockingbird,
You ready?
Scout, the young girl, when she is pushed into Boo Radley's yard, she's in a tire. I have no idea how kids today could have any idea what they were doing with her inside a tire. We always did that. I remember years later reading Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer and wondering what the fuss was about. We had done a lot of those things. And one day I came home, someone said there'd been a fire. And we get there, and this little shack that we had all been living in was just ashes and twisted tin, and everything that you ever knew in life is just there. I mean, it's smoldering. When I was a boy, Savannah was hell. My mother lived in one room in this old tenement with an outdoor bathroom. That is the worst place I've ever lived. And so you had the contrast between rural poverty, which is what we had in Pinpoint, which was very livable. And then you had urban squalor, and that was horrible. Because whenever you flushed the toilet or someone else flushed that didn't actually go in the sewer system, it went in somebody else's yard. My all-encompassing word is gross. I mean, it was putrid. It was a smell of raw sewage. There were these boards. People would make these sort of makeshift paths to get across to just the gross wetness in the backyard. Savannah is still a segregated city. One of the major parks downtown is a rectangle, Forsyth Park. You were never allowed to walk to the interior of that park. That's how I figured out the word circumnavigate. So you walk around, and so you could not go across the park. I was supposed to go to school in the afternoon. My mother wasn't there to make me go because she had to go to work. So I wandered the streets by myself. I was 6. You were hungry and didn't know when you'd eat, and cold and didn't know when you'd be warm again. My mother had difficulty with 2 little boys and working as a maid. So she asked my grandparents for help. And my grandmother suggested that she let her raise these 2 boys. And one Saturday morning, we woke up and my mother said, put all your things in the grocery bag. And remember the paper grocery bags in those days. And my brother took one and neither one was full. But all of our items, just imagine everything you have in less than a paper bag. So we took our grocery bag each and walked the couple of blocks from Henry Lane to East 32nd Street. That was the longest and most significant journey I ever made because it changed my entire life.
So it's a very dramatic story. You can see he comes from, Gullah was his first language, not even English. His father left, and he's in this, raised and lives through this dire poverty in the segregated South in Savannah. And to go from there to the Supreme Court of the United States is a tremendous journey, a great American success story. And it's full of twists and turns. You've only seen the first 12 or so minutes, and he goes to his grandfather, and his grandfather turns his life around, gives Justice Thomas hard work, discipline. He's poor, and he himself has less than a year education, but he believes in education, sends Justice Thomas to parochial schools run by Irish nuns, and they give him a good education. I mean, they're all Black schools. It's still the segregated South, but he thrives in that environment. He decides he wants to be a priest. He would have been one of the first African-American priests in Savannah. But by then, so he goes to seminary, and now these are formerly all-white seminaries, and he's among the first to desegregate them. And there he experienced racism for the first time, and also it's the late 60s. He's believing the church isn't doing enough for civil rights anyway, but it reaches a peak in 1968 when he hears one of the seminarians say, while they're watching TV, it's the day Martin Luther King Jr. was shot, and one of the seminarians says, "I hope that son of a bitch dies." And that was so shocking to Justice Thomas, as it is shocking to hear, that he loses his faith, he loses his vocation. He tells his grandfather he doesn't want to be a priest. His grandfather kicks him out, And then he has to go wherever. He has nowhere to go. He has to go wherever he can get a full scholarship, which is Holy Cross in Worcester. And there he has his Black radical period. He helps form the Black Student Union. He invites Black Panthers to speak. As he says, he's an angry Black man to whom race and racism explains everything. So he goes through that period, and he only by sort of hitting bottom and finding the errors of some of these programs that he finds his way back to the values of his grandfather and the religious upbringing that he had from his grandfather and the nuns, and finally to the point where he can vote for Ronald Reagan and work in the Reagan administration. So I've kind of shortened it, but it's an amazing story, and it culminates in the Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill hearings, and then his many years on the court since. So it's an incredible story with a lot of twists and turns. He tells it really well. I think you get a sense in that clip of his voice and his way of talking about this, and you see his life through his eyes, and I hope it is a moving experience for everyone watching.
Thank you. So before we go to Q&A, if you are open to that, I hope, just one more time, when is it going to air again? When is it going to air, excuse me, for the first time next week?
Good question. I always can't say that enough.
Yes.
It's going to be on PBS next Monday, May 18th at 9 p.m.
Okay.
So you can tune in. You can also go to our website, justicethomasmovie.com, where you can see where it's playing in other parts of the country, although it's all the same day. Some stations have changed the hour and made it a different hour. So you can go there, you can watch our trailer, you can sign up for a newsletter. Eventually, it'll be streaming, and you could find out about streaming. So I invite people to do that too, but you can see the whole film a week from today at 9 p.m.
Excellent, thank you. And Donna, can you read the questions from the clipboard? Again, everyone, if you have questions, just post them in the clipboard, and we'll try and get to as many as we can here this evening. Donna, do you want to go ahead and start with the first question?
From Terry Oldham, any way this movie could make it to the movie theaters before the November election?
Well, that is a good question. I mean, it had been in theatrical release. It was released in movie theaters starting January 31st, and it was in 110 theaters around the country, including in Washington, D.C. It was in the AMC Georgetown. It did very well. That's a lot of theaters for a documentary. It got a lot of press. The press is all on our website, justicethomasmovie.com. We had a great piece by Kathleen Parker in the Washington Post, for instance, called Clarence Thomas, American Hero. So it had its time in theaters. We were thinking we maybe could get back to theaters around now, but I don't know about theaters. You know, they're not opening.
Right.
Who knows? It will definitely be streaming by the summer. So I hope that if people don't see it on PBS, they can stream it both over the summer and into the fall.
Okay, well, that answers one of the questions that after it airs on PBS, where could people see it? So keep an eye out, in other words.
Yeah, so check our website, justicethomasmovie.com. We'll post it there, or just sign up for our newsletter and we'll let you know when it's streaming.
Okay, from Wendy, has Justice Thomas seen the final movie? What do he and Ginny think of it?
Well, Ginny has seen it. Ginny thought it was great. I mean, it was very hard for Justice Thomas and Ginny to do these interviews. I mean, you've only seen the beginning, but you know, reliving the confirmation battle was very hard for both of them. Ginny cried during the interview, and she said she cried watching the film. I mean, it was hard. All the more reason I feel privileged that they trusted us to tell their story. Justice Thomas has not seen it yet. You know, he knows Ginny liked it, his son saw it and liked it, lots of his friends have seen it and liked it. I hope that he does see it, but so far, not yet.
All right. One question from Mike. When making a movie like this, can you describe the process, selecting the music, finding photos and clips? That just those very few minutes that we saw had quite a lot of that.
Well, that is a good question, and that really depends on our whole team. You know, you're the director, producer, I usually get credit for everything, but I think it was beautifully shot. You can see some of the shots of the marshes that come through by a great cameraman, James Callanan. And we had an archival research team led by our associate producer, Greta Swanson. And my wife, Gina Pack, who is my business partner, was intimately involved in it throughout. So we had a team of people doing that. I mean, I think the music is great. And we had a composer compose all the original music. I mean, there are variations on Moon River. I mean, you heard Louis Armstrong doing it, which is hard to beat, but we did many variations and lots of themes, and I think he did a brilliant job. And Charlie Barnett, he's a local composer in Maryland. So we were one, you know, it's been 3 years in the making. It's a long process, and the editing alone was a year because it is a complicated process. I think it looks deceptively simple when you see the final product, but it took a lot of work and a lot of creativity on the part of others, actually.
Okay. Does the movie cover how Justice Thomas developed his legal perspective from
Yes,
constitutional studies, personal experience, etc.?
I think it does. I mean, in a way, I think the whole film, because his judicial philosophy comes out of his life, I think you see it emerge in the course of the film. I mean, it's called Created Equal because his jurisprudence is rooted in the Declaration and the Constitution, of course, but especially the Declaration. And you see how his values, and he relates that to the values of both his grandfather who raised him and these Irish nuns. I mean, you see those values emerge, you see them tested during his time rebelling against them in the late 60s, and you see them tested during the confirmation battles and even before. So I think you see his philosophy emerge out of his life. I mean, I think that's something that happens through the course of the film.
Okay. What did you learn about Justice Thomas that surprised you the most?
Well, the thing that impresses me always about him, even seeing this little clip, I'm impressed, is his resilience in the face of tremendous opposition and his unwillingness to define himself as a victim. I've just written an op-ed. I think it's going to be on Fox.com tomorrow. I mean, about that. I mean, he and his grandfather as well have many reasons that they could declare themselves victims, you know, way more than most, but he won't. I mean, he grew up in the segregated South, suffered real racism, but he won't see it that way. He thinks of himself as blessed. He says a prayer for humility every day. I think a very rare quality here in the town that we live in, you know, the DC area. More politicians and leaders should ask for that virtue. And it's those qualities, that resilience and that unwillingness to define himself as a victim that I'm struck by all the time when I think of his life story.
Okay. From Darren, how much does your movie track with Justice Thomas's book, My Grandfather's Son?
It tracks with the book. I mean, we have even used him reading aloud some portions of the book. But I think the difference is, I mean, for one thing, the book ends when he becomes Supreme Court Justice, and we have a section on his years on the court. But I think the main difference is really hearing him tell it to me and directly to the audience, rather than write a book and reflect on it. You get his unmediated experience. I hope the film reproduces in a way what it's like to spend 2 hours with Justice Thomas in a way that a book cannot. You know, you get a sense of who he is, his personality, his emotions and his feelings about these things in a different sort of way than you do in the book. I'm a big admirer of the book. I recommend everybody go out and buy it. It's called My Grandfather's Son. It was a bestseller. He wrote it about a little over 10 years ago, but still good and a great book. So it tracks with it in a way. I mean, if you've read the book, I think you'll still like the film and vice versa. But it's a different medium and it's a different way of experiencing him and his life.
Okay. From Juanita, will there be any efforts to promote the movie to colleges and universities or schools as a way of spreading awareness?
That is a very good question. And my wife, I've already mentioned, is sort of in charge of that effort. I mean, we've had a lot of requests from colleges, and we will certainly do that post the PBS broadcast, probably starting in the fall. But beyond that, we feel strongly that the film should be shown every February at every high school for Black History Month across the country. Maybe not the whole film, but clips of the film along with curriculum materials. And we're going to prepare all that and work very hard to get it into school districts around the country. I mean, as everyone knows, every February, every high school has lots of material on African-American history. I mean, including, there's the traditional material on, say, the Civil Rights Movement, but there's a lot of contemporary political material from places like Black Lives Matter, and now the New York Times 1619 Project, making slavery the foundational moment in American history. And there's a lot on reparations, on mass incarceration. We think one different kind of story should be told. And we're particularly anxious to reach young people who may not have heard this story and who may not even experience this aspect of African American history. So we're going to work hard over the next several years, really, to get it accepted in every high school in America, if we can, for Black History Month. So yes, that's an important thing.
A somewhat related question from another person about would the film be available at the African American History Museum in DC?
Well, we have not had, I mean, we haven't had a great deal of support from the African American History Museum, in fact, but it certainly will be available. I'm always open to discuss it with them. As you know, or maybe most of your members know, he was originally not even in the museum at all, and it took a lot of political pressure for them to put him in a little bit. So he's in an exhibit about Thurgood Marshall, and he's like the other Supreme Court judge. So I don't think they're going to be wildly enthusiastic about doing it, but if they want to, sure, we would make it available. I think that would be a great venue for it.
One person is saying, how can we tell others about this film? Well, I think you've mentioned your website. And
yes, send people to the website, justicethomasmovie.com. Send it out, and if any of you have newsletters or email lists, send it out. Tell them about the PBS broadcast next week, next Monday. And I think that, you know, and beyond that, they can sign up for the newsletter. They can visit the website. I'm anxious to get the word out. I'm very pleased that it's on PBS. I really hope people of diverse political views go to see it. And especially, you know, I have had a lot of liberals see it. I mean, it doesn't convert them, of course, but I think you can't really dismiss Justice Thomas and not see the seriousness of his point of view after you see the film. And we've had a good response.
Well, there's one question, I'm going to modify it somewhat, and that is, how did you first get the idea to make the film? Did you reach out to Justice Thomas? What was the process like to get him to agree to work with you? I know you mentioned a little bit about this before we started.
Yeah, I mean, as I had mentioned, you know, mutual friends had told me that he was dissatisfied with his image, and I had a meeting with him, and I very quickly wanted to do the film. I had a series of meetings. I'm not sure how I got lucky enough to get him. I was passionate about the story. He did trust me. And one of the great things about Justice Thomas, even in this clip, it said, you know, when he was born, his mother said he was too stubborn to cry. Once he decides on things, on he goes. And once he decided, he went forward with the film. He never hesitated. Even though it was difficult and maybe more time-consuming than he thought, he just barreled forward. And he and Ginny had no editorial control or insight, nor did they really ask me to do anything. So he has been great throughout. I certainly hope he sees it and likes it. But it's a process, and you know, I mean, I think that, you know, that they worried about it for a while during the year that we were editing, and it's a lot of trust, and I'm honored that they did trust us. It's a mysterious process. I'm not sure how we finally got him to say yes.
When you did the filming in Georgia, did you travel with him to his childhood home and childhood places, or was that the film crew?
That was really the film crew. I mean, because the film's premise is him looking to camera and telling his story, we didn't want to do the walking through his hometown stuff. It's a sort of somewhat different format. So we actually interviewed him in a studio in Virginia, talking about Virginia. So he lives in Virginia. It was convenient for him to go to the studio. It was all in a studio. I mean, it's enough that he gave us 30 hours of his time in the studio to get him to also go with us to Georgia. So, and we didn't really want that. I mean, I think that it takes away from the sense that he's looking at you, he's talking at you. There was, at the very end, a little bit of him talking to his clerks, but we didn't want to make a verite style film where we followed him around. It was him talking to the viewer, looking straight at camera, looking directly at you, telling you his story. So it was the crew. We made several trips to Pinpoint and Savannah. and you know, so it was not him. I mean, I've met his mother and his sister who still live there, but it wasn't a film where we were going to interview the people who knew him. You know, we didn't, because we felt that once we started interviewing people who knew him and all the different sides and all these disputes, people would lose the sense of his voice and who he is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, one more question. You had mentioned that it will be out on streaming later this year. Would it also be available on DVD?
Yes, it'll be on, I'm sure it'll be on DVD, Blu-ray, as well as streaming.
Okay.
I mean, it'll be in every medium that we could think to distribute it in. I'm anxious to get a wide distribution.
Okay.
Great. So, any other parting words for our team, for our audience here tonight to share with them?
Well, I will say that if they're actually interested in other programs of Manifold Productions, such as the ones that you mentioned, Cheryl Lynn, up front, they can go to our company website, which is manifoldproductions.com. There are trailers there, and for all those films, there are ways to purchase a DVD, since they've been out for a while. I think that many of them really would be of great interest to you know, your members. So I invite people to do that as well. That's manifoldproductions.com. And I appeal to them again, finally, to watch it on PBS and tell their family and friends.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. This has really been delightful, and I know that everyone is looking forward to seeing the film.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.